Welcome to Surfcast. Thank you for joining me. This is another episode of Truth Talks. As we say every time at the beginning of every Truth Talk episode, truth is defined as something that is verifiable, it is undeniable, it is reliable. If it's those three things, it's truth. Well, I want to talk to you tonight about this idea of finishing well. Now, I'm a marathon runner. If you look at me today, you probably wouldn't believe that. Well, actually, once I was a marathon runner, but I will be a marathon runner again someday. Let me show you. Here's some of my medals. This is just a few of those, and this one that you see right here on the front happens to be a marathon, a Marine Corps marathon that I've done on a number of occasions. Love that race. It's my favorite race of all time. I really wanted to run it this year. COVID-19, we're going to talk about this probably for a few more weeks or months or maybe even years. I'm sure that our children and our grandchildren are going to read about this COVID-19 saga in the history books down the road. Well, COVID affected a lot of people. Now, I never intended to quit running. It just happened that way. Let me tell you first how I started running. Years ago, a friend of mine named Gary Ray, he and I were having a conversation, and I've never been one to lack with words or the ability to communicate or talk. And quite frankly, I sometimes would be accused of maybe even blowing smoke, as my boys would say, and just kind of running my chops sometime. And I was talking to Gary Ray one day, and for whatever reason, he was like, "Let's go for a run, man." I was like, "Yeah, that's cool, man. Let's do it." And so we left the Lee University campus to go on a run one day, and we left the gymnasium, which is right next to my office, and we headed up the street about 3/4 of a mile to what's called the bypass in our town. This is a 4-lane highway, pretty safe to run on. It's not an issue, but it's a really, really steep grade. It's a hill. It seemingly goes almost straight up at some points of it. Gradual climb for the most part, but there's a couple little areas that was pretty straight. And so I'm sitting here, or I'm standing here, and I'm running, and I'm panting, and I'm like, just about to die, frankly. And I get to the start of that hill, and I look up the hill. Man, I lose all of my ambition, all of my desire, everything. I was overwhelmed just by the mountain that was standing in front of me, or the mountain that I was standing in front of, getting ready to run up. Well, Gary looked over his shoulder, and I'm obviously trailing behind him. There's a great bit of distance between us, and I see Gary, and he takes off, and he runs on up the hill, and I'm running, and I'm walking, and I'm walking, and I'm running, and I'm stopping, and I'm running, and I'm walking, and I'm stopping, and now I'm stopping, and I'm walking, and I'm stopping, and I'm not running. Gary turns around when he gets to the top of the hill, runs back down, and said, "Let's go," and starts running back up the hill with me. This time, I had a partner that was running with me to kind of keep me on track, to keep me going up the hill. Well, I went up the hill and went down the curve and made it back to the Lee University campus eventually, and Gary and I had a conversation about running. I said to Gary, "Let me lose about 20 pounds and I'll go run with you." I think this was about 10 to 11 years ago. Well, I lost those 20 pounds within a few weeks, and I said to Gary, "Let's go run," and I started back running. So kudos to Gary Ray, who kind of got me back into the running business after my running days in the Marine Corps when I was a young man. Well, long story short, from that year all the way up until last year, all the way up until this year, I ran the Marine Corps Marathon. All the way up to last year, I ran the Marine Corps Marathon. Last year, I wasn't able to do it. This year, I'm not able to do it. So a couple things in my head that really I'm thinking through as I process all of this. Number one, nobody kept me from running but me. Just like the encouragement of Gary helped me to run well, but it didn't finish the race for me. Every time I crossed the finish line, and every time I got one of these medals that I was able to have somebody on the other side of the line put this across my neck, and I had this medal that now I have a bunch of those hanging out at the house. Yeah, I had some encouragement along the way, but it was me doing the running. And when I didn't finish well, it was because I didn't finish well. So I want to use this acronym START, S-T-A-R-T. Many friends have asked me over the years, "How do you run a marathon?" Well, they're looking for, I guess, the magic secrets. Or all my kids have ran with me on races, and none of them on a marathon, but they've all done a half marathon. And so I simply say to them, they're looking for this great idea of how do you do this marathon. Well, there's a lot of, people out there who are pros at this stuff and they know what they're doing. But I tell people all the time, the way you finish a marathon is one step at a time. And the way you run a marathon is you've got to start. Okay, COVID-19, it's now bumping into, I don't know, man, almost 3 months, I guess now, March, April, May. Yeah, we're headed into almost 3 months of this stuff, and it doesn't look like it's going to get great in the next few days. So I want to speak tonight to this idea of such were some of you. There's a great passage in Scripture. It talks about the power of redemption, and it talks about people whose lives have been changed. And the Apostle Paul writing gives this reference to such were some of you, people who were not living in grace. They were not living in relationship with God. They were not living in faithful communion with God. But because of the transforming power and the redemptive work of Christ, they actually came from what they were at one point, which was bad and negative and sinful and all of those things, to now what was good. Not to take away from Scripture, because I would never do that, but I want to think about that for just a minute from a little bit different perspective. What about some of the things that we've laid aside that we didn't need to lay aside? Now, I personally didn't need to lay aside running. I mean, I'm talking, okay, I don't have to run a marathon every year, but I'm telling you, man, I'm not doing anything. I'm not running any distance right now. I was a marathon runner once. I will be a marathon runner again. You were something once. You can be that something again. START. Now, let's break the acronym down, all right? It's very simple. START. You've got to make the decision that you want to be the person who is going to step up in your game for yourself. Nobody else can do this for you. You're going to have to be the person who's going to have to step up. The first S, you're going to have to step up and make the decision on your own that you're going to do this. Secondly, you're going to have to put some time into it. Time is really your friend. Now, COVID-19 has yielded a lot of time for a lot of people that they've been doing other things, and now they've reclaimed some of that. So time is your friend, but you've got to invest the time if you're going to make a difference. So you got to do this idea that you got to step up your game. It's going to take some time and some investment on your own part, and your attitude really matters. There's some leadership quotes out there, your attitude determines your altitude, and there's things like that. A lot of those little concepts and little ideas. But I really want to speak to that for just a minute, because your attitude makes a difference in several ways. Number one, your attitude makes a difference on how you're going to approach a situation. Your attitude makes a difference on how you're going to reflect on a situation. Your attitude makes a difference as to whether or not people really want to hang out with you. So you got to step up your game, right? You got to put the time into it. Your attitude matters, right? So STAR, all right. You got to do the right thing. Now that sounds like a little cheesy concept, but it's not a little cheesy concept. If you're going to run a marathon one day, you got to do the right thing. And the right thing is determined by what you eat. It's determined by the level of your exercise. It's determined by the timing. It's determined by a lot of variables. So in our life, everyday life, we've got to make the tough choices to do the right thing. I don't need to give you a laundry list of things to do. You know what you got to do yourself. That's something that's up to you. It's not up to me. It's your game, not mine. So let's reflect for just a minute. You got to step up your game. It's going to take some time for you to do this. You're going to actually adjust your attitude if necessary. You're going to do the right thing. So STAR, and the final T, be tenacious. The day that I ran with Gary Ray, if I had not made a verbal commitment to him, I probably would have never ran another race. This guy ran to the top of the hill, which was probably about maybe a half a mile, maybe a little bit more than that. He ran to the top of the hill. He ran back down, ran it again, this time with me. He was a true friend. He was a true friend. Gary is the kind of guy, he's just, gentle and kind and all of those things. He heard me, he listened to me, but he held me accountable to do the right thing. And he held me accountable to engage in the journey. So as I talk about this Truth Talks, I want to ask you a question. Now, again, the Scripture, that's another whole thing. You got to unpack that for yourself. Such were you, such were some of you. You were in bondage, you were in captivity, you were bound up, but God freed you. But what about this? Maybe you were a good student at one point. Can you be a good student tomorrow? Maybe you were a good parent at one point. Can you be a good parent tomorrow? Maybe you were an honest businessman at one point. Are you going to be an honest businessman tomorrow? Maybe you use your gifts and your talents and your abilities to make somebody else's life better, but you put those on the shelf. Are you going to be the person who's going to start now to take those things back off the shelf, use those for God's goodness so that somebody else's life can be better? You know, we could go on and on and on with these things. The point is, what is that one area of your life that you need to change? And the only way you're going to do that is when you start. You know, I've got a bunch of these. I showed them to you a while ago, right? I think my count now is about 13 or 14 half marathons. And if I remember correctly, it's about maybe 4 full marathons. Actually, it is four full marathons, because the next time I run the Marine Corps Marathon, I will be introduced into or inducted into what's called the Runners Club. So if you do 5 of the Marine Corps full marathons, then you're what's called in the Runners Club. And it's a cool little deal, right? So you get the rights to claim that on your shoulder or wherever you put patches that you get from races. But for me, the last year and a half have been discouraging for me in the area of running. I haven't gained a lot of weight. I'm not like excessive. I'm not any of those kind of things. I'm disappointed mostly in myself, because running is a discipline that helps shape every other area of my life. So let me challenge you this way. I used to be a marathon runner. Someday, I will be a marathon runner again. You know how I'm going to do it? I'm going to start. You know when I'm going to start? Tomorrow. Well, that's the truth. Think about it. Make your own choices for the good of other people. As always, let me remind you, we are made for more. Give your best every time. Somebody is depending on that. Have a great day.